Hello and welcome to the Kaboom Animation Festival Online 2021. You're here with another Filmmakers Talk. We're talking to some of the makers of the short films in competition today, and specifically I am talking to the makers of the film How to Disappear, which is in our short documentary competition, and I'll be talking to Klengel and Leonhard Müllner, who are two of the three directors of this film. So welcome to Robin and Leonhard, with us through Zoom. We already said you should be in Amsterdam in real life, of course, but hopefully we can realize that next year. Your film is in the documentary competition. I think it's an extremely interesting project with really a kind of look of its own. And I think it's described in the log line as an anti-war film set in a war game. Can you say something about how this film came about? How did you come up with this particular idea for the film?
I mean, we're players. We play. We love to play. We have a hate-love relation towards this media. And while we are playing games, we do this as artists. Which does not differ us from most of or some of the other gamers when they're also thinking of doing different stuff within the game and bend the rules and like get some positive feedback from a community watching them making fun in video games. But we were like, while we were playing, we were trying to, as artists, to walk alongside the borders of the game, obviously, and cross it. And crossing the border, in this very moment, we got shot, and there was a voice which said, "You're deserting or come back." And this was the very moment in which we thought to make a film about desertion. Desertion is a almost untold story in the most of the war scenarios of video games. So whatever we are doing in video games as artists or as filmmaker is being disobedient towards the algorithm. And so desertion was kind of very obvious to go for.
If you refuse to play a game, you are a spoilsport. If you refuse to fight in war, you are a deserter. But can you actually desert in a game?
I think you're going against the rules of the game, right? I think that's what makes it interesting. Yeah. The game wants you to fight, it wants you to try and win, and you're deliberately disobeying the orders, the sort of master orders of the game. Was it for you also a film that had to do mostly with gaming? Because I think there's also more, right? There's a sort of broader message maybe also that goes beyond the gaming community.
I mean, definitely, we do like to think of two audiences. When we make our films, one would be the people that actually play those games, because of course they know these spaces very well and they have experiences that other people don't have. So we want to do something which they also can enjoy. So adding enough layers and telling enough interesting stories so it gets interesting for them. But at the same time, of course, we also make movies that would appeal to people who have never played and are totally foreign to that medium, and they should also have something from it. And so, yeah, I don't know, it was kind of this idea to make an anti-war movie in the very most unlikely place there is to do so. So that was this shooter game, and also to use these wonderful, beautiful, and breathtaking backgrounds of these battlefields to tell something more meaningful somehow than the game usually does, and to kind of recycle these atmospheres and this magic of the game to tell something that is really not often told. And this is the story of deserting, of running away, of disobeying in war, and it really changed the course of history so much that people resisted and didn't do what they were told to do in that sense. But we usually never, also in school, we don't learn these stories. It's not something that we would think about very often. So we found it important to make a movie about it.
Yeah, I think that there were two things you said that I found very interesting, and one we should maybe return to in a sec, about those beautiful backgrounds, right? Which I think is interesting. Beautiful backgrounds for what's basically supposed to be killing, in the end, what you're supposed to do in the game. But I think your remark about desertion is interesting, because there's this whole culture of shame connected to it, right? If you have a family member who was a deserter, this often went unmentioned. Is that also something that you felt was a kind of bigger agenda? You mentioned this is not really part of history books, whereas probably desertion is part of every war. Is it something that you really wanted to highlight more?
When we started making this film, we thought we had it more in mind as something from the past, a phenomenon that might have a strong relevance in the past, like in the First World War, which prominently ended through mass desertions and would have gone on for much longer if it wasn't for these big strikes, disobedience and desertion. But also in contemporary societies, it still plays a big role. If you take these examples of American soldiers from the Iraq War, where also tens of thousands of people deserted. Or if you take, like, also then, you know how it is when you start researching about the topic, then the topic pops up also in your personal surroundings. So then my father told me the story of his best friend whose son deserted in the 50s, which was after the war. So, and this still kind of led to this son being totally expelled from the family and eventually committing suicide, which is something I really didn't know, but it's really connected to shame and seen through these nationalist glasses. Desertion is really something you really shouldn't do. But in many cases in history, there was a good reason to do so, and people took risks to do it. And yeah, in some instances, like in the end of First World War, it definitely was a good thing that many people deserted, because otherwise this craziness would have endured much longer.
A place for peace is not inscribed into the algorithm of a war game. But even though there is no way to desert in Battlefield, it might still be a good place to think about disobedience in war and games. Discipline has always been a social question. Disciplining soldiers requires a centralization of power, taking decisions away from the common people. As such, deserting was often a resistance against the dominant social order.
But still it's unmentionable, right? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, in some countries, it's still like murder not expiring. So if you desert once, it like your how do you say, the state looks for you the whole life, or will punish you through your whole life until you're punished.
Yeah.
So it seems to be super crucial for the state in order to keep people on the front until our days. Like there are a lot of states who are like like the USA. Like recently there was this kind of very important or very ventilated case from this Vietnam War veteran who deserted, and he is an old guy. He went to prison now. So after they found him recently. So this is really dramatic.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's also like it's very hard to desert. It's super difficult because you risk your comrade's life. You're a kind of a so-called Schicksalsgemeinschaft, like society of like faith, like you stick together, and there are like 4 or 3 men, 5 men with one machine gun and so on, and if one is missing, like it's a huge threat for the whole group.
Yep.
So the group is is observing each other as well. So it's a social thing within the army as well. So
Yeah, there's a lot of social control in that sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because the technique of the film is of course also interesting, working in this game engine. What were the advantages or disadvantages of working in this game engine to make a movie like this?
I mean, the advantage to make movies in video games is, of course, that you don't need a camera and you don't need to worry about light effects or special effects or something, because they are just there in the engine. Yeah. So our movies are very cheap, but of course it has a negative side as well. As I mean, we are basically parasiting this medium, so we're whatever the medium, the code allows us to do, we can do, and it's very difficult to bend these rules, especially in those games where the code is very restricted. So there's no modding, there's no private servers, there's nothing you can just hijack. So all the scenes that you see in this movie, they're actually taken out of just normal gameplay. It's just people, like, while we were filming, we were just like any other player. People were playing the game in the background, and they were shooting, and they were searching for us, and they were trying to kill us. So yeah, our avatars died like hundreds of times during the course of the shootings, like the movie shootings. So it was a really risky thing, and it was also I mean, it has many challenges. You can imagine how difficult it is to have a very precise idea of something that should happen. Like this, there's one scene where in the beginning of the movie where there is like an airplane coming from through like during a shot and during a pan, and it should appear like on a certain point, and I don't know how many times they shot our friend who was controlling the plane, and he should like be in there exactly the right time, and like this is really tricky, especially if the whole engine isn't really meant to make movies. It's like a byproduct of something else. Yeah. In this case.
I'm thinking that it's interesting. Then normally animation is so controlled, right? And now it's much more like shooting a film in a busy shopping street or in the world outside, and people might just walk into your movie set and maybe do things that you don't want them to do, which I think is interesting to see that in animation again. I was thinking also, was there a particular reason to choose this game? Because the gaming community is very big and there are many choices. Were there advantages to choose this particular game to use as the world to set your film in?
I wanted just to add to
sure.
the former question and then answer it, because I think it's very important. The political reason why we have chosen desertion as a topic is that disobedience is one of the main motors, one of the main most important tools for democracy or for other movements which made our society better or great in some sense. Like not just democracy came out of mass desertion, also like socialism or pacifism and even women's movements, because of people were just like the women were in the factories working and now in charge of more than before, and so on. So it was also desertion which created our democracies, and this is very important for us to say and to add.
I mean, I would add maybe that, of course, not every kind of disobedience is good. Of course, there's stupid disobedience, as we see in Corona times as well. Sometimes it, of course, makes sense to follow the
commonsensical rules.
Sometimes it's really necessary. Exactly. But sometimes it's really necessary to do so, and to and in fact, many kind of good things really were only made possible because people were brave enough to not follow the rules and take personal risks for that. Somehow, of course, that is important for us to say. And for the very specific game of Battlefield 5, it really came out of us playing it. That was the first thing. We usually like to, when we do something with games, we start by playing them and discovering them and seeing what they can and what your avatar can do and what it can't do. So while playing, we had this idea that we have to do something about deserting, because like actually the very first idea was to use the game as a social space and to tell the players or to read to the players diaries of actual deserters of the actual war that they are playing. So we already have a collection of diaries and of notes and of written in the field of people that ran away, because we found it so interesting to think about like the opposite of what you would do, which is of course running away, and we wanted to confront people with that. In the end, this wasn't possible due to technical problems.
People kept shooting the people reading, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So that didn't really work out, but then we made a film out of it. But that was actually the first idea. Yeah. And I think it's especially interesting because it's so narrow. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's really such a streamlined game that offers you a lot of visual effects and explosions and whatsoever. But it's not an open world. There's really nothing besides the battlefield. So we always say the more restricted a game is, the more stupid it is in some sense, the more fun it is also to misuse it and to make something else of it.
To disobey, in a sense, right? I guess that's the. I have only time for one last question. You said you almost finished another project. Is it another project using a game engine, or is it something completely different that you're working on right now?
We are a collective, pseudo-Marxist media guerrilla, which is mostly, or I think mainly, working in the digital spaces of video games. This is what we are doing. We are misusing them, making films, installations, importing stuff, exporting stuff out of the games. And our next project will be the follow-up from our first film operation, Chain Walk. It's a bit different. It plays in Washington, D.C., and we are working there on the topic of democracy and capitalism, this mésalliance, this link which now is really corroding, and making a lecture ballet out of it, of this.
So it will be a dance movie actually, after all. It's kind of weird. Dancing in these spaces with these avatars, and with these clumsy soldiers. This was really fun for us to do, but we're still working on it.
It already sounds extremely exciting, so we cannot wait to see it when it is finished. For now, that is all we have time for, unfortunately. The film, How to Disappear, by Robin and Leonhard, and your other you need to mention the third person also.
Michael,
yes, right. Also director of this film, is still on view at the festival until the end of April 5th. It is in the documentary section, which also means that you can vote for this film to win a prize for the best documentary film in the program. For now, I would very much like to thank you, Leonhard and Robin, that you could be with us through Zoom to talk a little bit about your film. And of course, we hope to see you soon in the next edition of Kaboom Animation Festival, actually in Amsterdam again. Thank you very much.
Would be a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.